Okay, good morning, everyone. Let's continue. So we are picking up in Meretz Hashem in Perek Shira. We're continuing to focus a little bit on Laila. So remember again, in our last class, we've been focused on the statement of the night. Lahagid baboker chastecha ve'emunascha baleilos. So we were focusing in our last class, and will Meretz Hashem continue to focus in this class as well, on the concept of Emunah, a definition of Emunah, a context of Emunah. So we went through again Rashi's approach, well, two Rashis, both in number 3 and number 4. Did we do the Radak? I think we maybe left off at number 5. Is that possible? Okay, so let's take a look. Let's begin with the Radak. So remember again, what we know from this pasuk, before we plug it back into Perek Shira and try to understand the overarching message of Laila, of the night, what we understand from David HaMelech is that he is creating a contrast. There's something, lahagid baboker chastecha ve'emunascha baleilos. So ultimately, again, the contrast between day and night is obvious and observable. What David HaMelech is also doing is creating a contrast between the concept of chesed and the concept of emunah. So, as we continue to develop this a little bit, take a look at the Radak, and this is actually quite beautiful. The Radak writes, "Uladas razal shepirshu li'olam shekulu Shabbos u'menucha." So remember again, we already saw in Rashi this idea that the boker that David HaMelech is referring to is not necessarily the boker of morning, but rather again it's the boker of geula, right? What we called again Beis HaGeula, whether we're talking about messianic redemption, whether we're talking about Olam Haba, and that's why again, even going to the Mizmor Shir Yom HaShabbos. Remember, Shabbos doesn't have to refer to Shabbos as the 7th day of the week, but rather again, Shabbos could also refer to, as we saw before, the Yom Shekulo Shabbos. Once again, is that referring to messianic redemption? Is it referring to Olam Haba? I don't know that it necessarily matters. The answer to that for our purposes, it could be either one. So the Radak goes on and he espouses this same idea. Uladas razal shepirshu li'olam shekulo Shabbos u'menucha yihye perush baboker li'es ha'geula u'baleilos heim ha'golios. So ultimately, again, says the Radak, and I think we kind of touched on this in the last class as well. The Radak explains lahagid baboker chastecha. The boker refers to redemption. The Laila refers to galus, refers to exile. Kolomar, kishiyagia haboker. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. I think there's someone in the waiting room.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So he goes on, he says, Kolomar, kishiyagia haboker nagid chasdecha shetease imanu bahotziacha osano mehagalus. Afapi shanu chayavim kaliya bagalos mirov avanosenu. I'm just going to read one more line and we'll translate. V'nagid bagalu shua laila, emunascha sha'amarta lahotzi anu min agalus, ubotchim anu b'cha, shetekayim lanu havtechasecha. Where was that from? Was I hearing background music? Someone's okay, good. All right, good. So let me make sure I'm not losing it. Good. So the Radak says as well. So the Radak points out something really amazing. Going with this idea of Boker representing Geula, redemption. Laila representing Galus. So first we'll explain what the Radak is saying, and then we'll kind of build it out a little bit. So according to the Radak, Lahagid baboker chasdecha. Obviously, again, when Geula comes, the chesed of the Ribono Shel Olam is obvious and apparent, and it'll be clear to all. But incredibly enough, says Radak something amazing. You know, there's a fundamental machlokes in the Gemara. Let's focus for a moment on messianic redemption. When does Mashiach come? When does Mashiach come? So there's machlokes in the Gemara. I'm sorry? Say that once more. Good. Kulo chayev, kulo zakir. Right? It's a machlokes in the Gemara. Right? Either at the end of the day we could be fundamentally deserving of it, or perhaps there's just like a clock, and once you run down the clock, Mashiach's going to come at the end of some predetermined amount of time. So this is a fundamental machlokes in the Gemara. The Radak here points out something amazing. The Radak says what we daven for each and every day is Ribono Shel Olam, even if we don't deserve Mashiach, and even if we don't deserve Geula, we ask for it anyway. We ask for it anyway. So the Radak points out something absolutely amazing. Lahagid baboker chasdecha. Think about this just a moment. What's the ultimate chesed of Messianic redemption? The ultimate chesed which could be manifest in the coming of Mashiach? What would you say? Is the ability of Mashiach to come even if we don't deserve it. That's the ultimate chesed that focuses on the Boker. Remember again, if we go with the idea that Boker represents Mashiach, Boker represents redemption, the chesed of the Boker is the willingness of the Ribono Shel Olam to bring about Geula, even if we are undeserving of it. And ultimately, again, says the Radak, the Emunah Baleilos, that Emunah, that belief, that knowledge that you, Ribono Shel Olam, can bring about Mashiach, even if we don't deserve it, ultimately, again, is what gets us through the night. So the knowledge that even if we're undeserving, Geula could come, is by definition the Emunah which gets us through the nighttime of life. And again, this goes back to what we referenced before, because as was mentioned in our last class, the order seems to be a little bit backwards. Because if you understand that Boker is Mashiach and Laila is Galus, so which one should be mentioned first in the Pasuk? Laila, right? Just chronologically, we're currently in Galus, we're currently in the Laila, we're waiting ultimately again to get to the Boker of Mashiach. But now it makes a lot of sense, because what David HaMelech is saying is something incredibly amazing. We spoke about in our last class, that in order to get through the Laila of Galus, what do you need? What do you need? You need hope. You need hope to get through any crisis in life. You need hope. So ultimately, again, what David HaMelech is saying is, Lahagid baboker chastecha. It's that chesed of the boker. And specifically, according to the Radak, that chesed is that I don't have to wait till I deserve Mashiach in order for Mashiach to come. But you could even bring him even if I don't deserve it. That chesed of the boker is what is necessary in order to get the emunah. That's the belief that helps me get through the night. So once again, the Radak highlights this idea. So far we see a common theme. That first of all, Shabbos is not a reference to the seventh day of the week, but Shabbos is a reference to Yom Shekula Shabbos. The Boker is a reference to Messianic redemption. The Laila is a reference to Galus. And at the end of the day, the picture that David HaMelech is painting for us is the only way to get through the night of Galus is with the belief of the chesed of the Boker. The only way to get through what sometimes feels like an unending diaspora is a belief not just only in Mashiach, but a belief that the Ribono Shel Olam could bring that Mashiach again, even if we don't deserve it. That's the chesed. You know, I often feel that when we speak about concepts like this, they're often difficult for us to relate to. Why are they difficult for us to relate to? In general, when you speak about Mashiach, it's difficult for us to relate to it. For many of us. Why? So first of all, because nobody really knows what it is, right? That's number one. What is Yemos Mashiach going to look like? You know, we just, Daf Yomi just finished Maseches Shkalim a few days ago. And there's an incredible Gemara there that speaks about the Messianic era. And the Gemara talks about the idea that when Mashiach comes, the agricultural process is going to be expedited. So it normally takes wheat 6 months to go ahead and grow. When Mashiach comes, it may take a matter of weeks, it may take a matter of days. And then there's another opinion that says loaves of bread will grow from the ground. Yet there are other opinions that say Olam Kimin Hago Noheg. The world is going to be as it is. So one reason it's difficult for us to relate to Mashiach is because at the end of the day, we don't really know what it is. What's another reason why it's difficult to relate? And this is actually a good problem, but it's an interesting one. Why is it difficult for us to relate to Mashiach? Say it a little bit louder again.
Like, not as much anti-Semitism.
I'm sorry, I just can't hear you.
Like, not as much anti-Semitism.
Oh, excellent. You see, I'll ask you to ponder a very interesting question. Do you really want Mashiach? Now, don't answer it, because of course everybody will say, yes, of course I want Mashiach. Hey, think about this for just a moment. We live in incredible times, right? The truth is there anti-Semitism in the world? Of course, there's always anti-Semitism in the world. But think about this for just a moment. We're in Galus. How many of us acutely feel like we're in Galus? How many of us? Okay, so maybe you're just back from seminary, so you're still on that high, or just good, right? So, but Amir says, you know, Halavai Yisrael, get back there. So we should all get back there as Yisrael. But it wears off. You'll go on, and it's an interesting thing. Like, how much do we acutely feel like there's something fundamentally missing from our lives. So we have periods like that. Like on Tisha B'Av, when you're forced to focus on Churban, so we feel, and by the way, it's a pigam in us because there's a lot missing from our lives. There's an incredible amount. But think about the Jew historically. The Jew historically who had to constantly combat anti-Semitism. You know, I'll never forget my uncle Zichron Livracha. His father used to celebrate a personal Yom Tov on the second day of Pesach. Personal Yom Tov. Unless when you say, what is the second day of Pesach? When he was a boy in Poland, he was playing outside, and a group of Polish teenagers picked him up and threw him into a well. They threw him into a well, and he should have died, but miraculously, he didn't. See, he celebrated that as like a personal Yom Tov. And you hear a story like that, you're like, what? Like, what is that? That was Maisim B'chol Yom. That was coming. You were at the whim of the people who lived around you. You were at the whim of institutionalized anti-Semitism. The life of a Jew was worth absolutely nothing. And that was our national experience for generation after generation. You're young, so you don't necessarily realize the times in which you live. And these are, it's an overused term now, unprecedented times. But, you know, I don't mean about a pandemic. I mean just like in terms of like Klal Yisrael. Like think about what we have. And think about what we have in Galus. Forgetting about what's the incredible things that are happening in Eretz Yisrael. So sometimes it's hard for us to relate to this dynamic, but one of the things that we must constantly be ever aware and ever present of is we are in Galus. And we cannot forget that we are in Galus. And we cannot forget that as wonderful as life is here, this is not the way it should be. Am Yisrael belongs in Eretz Yisrael, with a Beis HaMikdash as a unified people, with the Ribono Shel Olam actively apparent and present in our midst. So again, does it mean that we're folding up shop and running back there? So halavai, some of us will be zoches, some of us won't, or some of us will now, some of us will later. But even before any life plans, a person has to have an awareness. And that awareness is incredibly important because we know that the moment we forget that we are in Galus, and the moment we begin to think that Galus life is l'chatchila, is the moment that we put ourselves in existential peril. So I'm just pointing this out because sometimes we see David HaMelech is referring to Galus as a dark night. And I think for many of us, when we read that pasuk, do we relate to Galus being a dark night? How many people here relate to Galus being a dark night? So maybe if you're very feeling, Rabbi Soloveitchik has a term. He says, the Ribono Shel Olam is Haya Hovev Yiyah. Ribono Shel Olam is timeless. He said past, present, future all together. So Rabbi Soloveitchik writes, he says that the Jew has the ability to go ahead and kind of tap into that divine timelessness. He calls it the unitive time consciousness. Unitive time consciousness, which means we see this by the Yamim Tovim, because by the Yamim Tovim, we don't go ahead and simply relive historical events, right? We just came off of Pesach. We're coming to Shavuos, right? Emir Hashem, B'Shat Tov L'Zachas. We have first day of Shavuos, we stand up for the Kriyas HaTorah. There's a whole machlokes haposkim as to whether or not you should stand up for the reading of Aseres HaDibros or not on Shavuos. So many poskim hold you're not supposed to stand up for Aseres HaDibros. In other words, if you stand up and for Kriyas Torah, you can stay standing. But if you sit for Kriyas Torah, you should not stand up. Why not? What do you think? Why not? What's the risk?
You're showing that those words of Torah are more important.
Excellent. Because who says Aseres HaDibros is any more important than Parshas Shmini? Or than Tazria Metzora, or Parshas Kedoshim, or Parshas... It's all Torah. So if you stand up for Aseres HaDibros, you're lending additional chashivos, importance, to the Aseres HaDibros more than the rest of Torah. By the way, I want to point something out. The Gemara Maseches Brachos brings down that Aseres HaDibros used to be part of Kriyas Shema. Isn't that incredible? Aseres HaDibros used to be part of Kriyas Shema itself. And then Chazal took it out. Why did they take it out? Because people were saying, Aseres HaDibros is more important than anything else. So Rabbi Soloveitchik is of the opinion, as many other poskim as well, that no, you can't stand up for Aseres HaDibros. Why? You're not showing that Aseres HaDibros are more important. Why do we stand up for Aseres HaDibros? Those who stand up. Why do you stand up for Aseres HaDibros? To reenact Ma'amad Har Sinai. Because what's happening over here is I am experiencing another Kabbalas HaTorah. The same reason that many kilos have the minhag to stand up for Az Yashir. Why am I standing up for Az Yashir? Because I am re-experiencing the notion of Kriyas Yamsov. It's not the pshat that I'm remembering that which happened in the past. I am re-experiencing it contemporarily now as well, what Rabbi Soloveitchik calls this unitive time consciousness. Just like the Ribono Shel Olam could be past, present, and future simultaneously. Obviously, we can't do that, but we could tap into that divine dynamic just a little bit. See, even if I don't feel in my relationship with Galus, I don't feel like I'm living in a dark night. Because Baruch Hashem, that's not my experience. That's not my experience. My experience is that even in Galus, it's a golden age of Jewry, which it absolutely is. But at the end of the day, remember, I can't be myopic and only see my particular circumstances. I'm a member of Klal Yisrael. And this great schos of being a member of Klal Yisrael is you live in the past, you live in the present, and you live in the future. And when I look at our story of Galus, it is an overwhelming, difficult one. So therefore, coming back to the Radak says, "Lahagid baboker chastecha." So how do you make it through the long, dark night of Galus? With hope, with optimism that Emir Tashem Mashiach is going to come. But not only is Mashiach going to come, what Radak is adding over here, what's the great chesed of Mashiach? What's the great chesed of the Ribono Shel Olam in Messianic redemption? The great chesed is even if I don't deserve it, the Ribono Shel Olam could still bring about that geula. Now, let's pause here for just a moment, because in general, this discussion of galus, we often think about on a national level. But remember, again, there's also a concept of personal galus. Right? What's personal galus? What would you say? So it could be nisyonos. Good. You could even globalize. I'm sorry? When you put yourself in it, what does that mean?
Distance yourself, like the rebels that went into Galus.
Oh, okay. So right. You could put yourself in self-imposed exile. Good, excellent. What else could it mean? Personal galus. This is incredibly. Anyone here ever experienced personal galus?
I feel like when someone goes through a depressive state, and puts themselves exile themselves.
Good. It could be depression, a depressive state. I want to see even something a little less dramatic than that. What is galus? Right? On a basic definition, what is galus?
Sorry, I was going to kind of...
Good.
Like when a person doesn't have vigor, really...
So when a person doesn't have it, good. These are examples. Before we get to the specific examples, a definition. What is galus? Just give me a definition. Galus is the state when or where I am not where I need to be. That's what galus is, right? To be gola. Somebody, Reuven kills Shimon accidentally. What's his punishment? It's chumash, by the way, not a trick question, right? Right? Ir miklat. What is that called? Galus. He goes to galus, right? Galus is I'm supposed to be here. I'm supposed to be home. Reuven's supposed to be home, but he accidentally killed Shimon. He is gola. He is exiled. So the concept of galus is I'm not where I need to be. Yes.
Why do you say having gola Machon Ohr Yehudis?
Oh, because excellent point. Because sometimes in order to grow, you have to take yourself out of a situation that you want to be in and go somewhere where you really don't want to be, but you need to be. So sometimes it's even having gola l'makom tar. I don't want to live there, or I don't want to be there. I'm totally happy here. I feel like this is where I need to be. But at the end of the day, this is maybe where I want to be, but it's not where I need to be. So I need to be gola. I need to lift myself up from where I want to be and ultimately go where I need to be. So there are different forms of galus. But on a most basic level, galus means I should be here, I'm not here, I'm somewhere else. And I just want to point out that this is an incredibly profound yesod because all of us experience inner personalistic galus. All of us. This is why, you could be standing in Eretz Yisrael. You could be standing on the Har HaBayis. You could be standing in the Beis HaMikdash. You could be the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur standing in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And you could be in a state of personalistic galus. Because if you're not where you need to be in life, if you're not doing what you need to be doing in life, if you're not cultivating the personality that you should really be cultivating, then you could be geographically in the right place, but you could be in a profound state of emotional galus. And this is, by the way, what I'm describing is pretty much like what you see throughout the Nevi'im, right? You see periods of time where Klal Yisrael were in the geographic correct location, right? They were geographically home, but they were in a state of spiritual exile. They were in a state of spiritual exile. So they were sitting on the earth of Eretz Yisrael, but yet, again, personalistically, so far from where they needed to go. So I'm sharing this with you because whenever we speak about Gullus, like I said before, because we live in such a different age, sometimes it's hard for us to relate to like Gullus as physical diaspora. Because as much as we intellectually know that we're not in Eretz Yisrael, sometimes I don't necessarily feel, and it's a pigam, I don't necessarily feel that I'm in Gullus. But I think we could all relate to personalistic Gullus. Because I think all of us have had times in life where I'm not where I want to be as a person. I'm not holding where I want to be holding, whether it's in my ruchnius or whether it's in my relationships, whatever it might be. And so just understand, I mean, you'll do this application, but whatever and whenever we learn about national gullus, whatever you're learning in that sense, you could always apply to personal gullus as well. So in this particular lesson, the same way, what gets me through national gullus? What gets me through the nighttime, the ongoing night of national gullus? Is the hope, is the belief, lahagid baboker chastecha, that it's going to be okay. The sun's going to come up, Mashiach's going to come, Geula's going to come, whether I deserve it, whether I don't deserve it, somehow, someway it's going to be okay. What do you do when you're suffering through personal galus? You remind yourself that some way, somehow, you're going to get through it. It's going to be okay. How, when, what, where, those are all variables that remain to be determined. But even when in a state of personalistic galus, some way, somehow, I'll get through it. If you continue a little bit, I'll share with you a beautiful idea by the Mari Cheskel. So the Mari Cheskel writes in number 6, you have a little biography over there as well. The Mari Cheskel writes as follows. He says, V'hinei, k'sha'kodesh baruch hu misnahig imanu b'midas ha'chesed ha'mefursim shegal la'in kol shu tov. So this is incredible. So the Mari Cheskel chooses to go in a little bit of a different direction in terms of understanding Boker versus Laila. See, he says, Lahagid baboker chastecha refers to those times in life where the chesed habore, the kindness and the goodness of the Ribono Shel Olam are obvious and apparent. Right? There are times in life where it's just so clear that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is taking care of me, that He loves me, that He's looking after me, He's showering His brachos upon me. That's lahagid baboker chastecha. And that's easy. Everyone has the ability to sing the praises of the Ribono Shel Olam when life is good and going according to plan. Masha'en Kain, second line in number 6. U'mishabchim b'leiv shali. And by the way, when life is good and things go my way, everyone is in love with the Ribono Shel Olam. Masha'en Kain, kishemisnahig b'midas hadin, afa pi sheme'ito lo teitze haros, shegam hara kulo tov, v'nikra chasadim mechusim, mikol makom tzarech lazeh Emunah gidola. And this is a beautiful insight. The Mari Cheskel says, but what about when life is difficult? What about when life is difficult? And what about when life is challenging? And what about when things don't go my way? And what about when I'm really unhappy with the things that are unfolding all around me? What's my relationship to the Ribono Shel Olam in those moments? So the Mari Cheskel writes, it's interesting. I have a share in the morning before Daf Yomi in Sidkas HaTzadik, Reb Tzadik HaKohen of Lublin. And today we actually just did a piece where Reb Tzadik writes that there are 2 ways you can know something. Right? What are the 2 ways you can know something? It's incredible. He says, you can know something in your mind and you can know something in your heart. Or he says, to say it a little bit differently, you can know something intellectually and you can know something emotionally. What's the difference between knowing something intellectually and emotionally? What would you say? What's the distinction?
Intellectually.
Okay.
Intellectually, you make it by logic, but emotionally, it's something that you would feel.
Good. What else is the difference? Excellent. What else?
It's based on fact.
Oh, interesting. Meaning intellect might be based on fact versus emotion, which is based on feeling. Good. What else? Yes?
People don't always follow what they want to come up with.
Oh, so this is what the Tzaddik says. And it's incredible. Once he says it, you're like, now so many of the things that I do make so much sense. He says, you can know something to be intellectually true and totally ignore it. Totally ignore it. I know that I should not eat the additional piece of chocolate cake. I know it. Intellectually, it's clear. Kashemesh b'tzarayim. But I could fundamentally ignore it. Interestingly enough, Reb Tzaddik posits, things that you know in your mind, you could know and you could ignore. Things that you know in your heart, you generally don't ignore. It's such a profound yesod, which is so interesting because I think this might be a little bit of a machlokus in Chasidim and Misnagdim, because I think Misnagdim might argue on this fact. I think if you were to ask the Briskers, they would fundamentally argue on this. They would say just the opposite. Things that you know in your mind, that's emes. Feelings are not emes, but herein lies your sin a chassid and a misnagid, right? Reb Tzaddik says just the opposite. The things that you know in your mind, I know a ton of things to be objectively true. Lav dafka that I actually act upon that information. Or that information doesn't necessarily inform my life, but the things that I feel, those are the things that become the immutable truths of my life. So the Mari Cheskel, again, I think different people may relate to this idea in different ways. I was very moved by this idea by Reb Tzaddik, and at least for myself, I found it to be unequivocally true because not a day goes by that I don't go against certain things that I know to be intellectually true, but either I just ignore them or just go against them. But that's what you hold in your heart. Those are very often the truths which inform the way that you live. In any event, the Mari Cheskel is highlighting this same yesod. And he says, intellectually, I know that everything the Ribono Shel Olam does is Latova. Right? We spoke about this in our last class, that's part of the fabric of Emunah. Emunah believes that ultimately, again, Gamzu Latova, everything that comes from the Ribono Shel Olam is Tov. I know it to be intellectually true. Emotionally, sometimes I don't necessarily agree with that. Or sometimes I just don't feel that. I know it, because of course, intellectually, I know HaKadosh Baruch Hu is good, HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves me, and therefore, by definition, everything that happens comes from that goodness, from that love. Intellectually, I know it. Emotionally, especially if I'm suffering, I might know it, but I might not feel it. So the Mari Cheskel says something amazing. He says what David HaMelech is trying to highlight to us is that it is not just enough to intellectually know that the Ribono Shel Olam is good and everything he does is good, but rather I have to work on myself to feel that as well. And he goes on, he says something amazing. He goes on, he says, Mikol Makom Tzarech Lazeh Emunah Gedola. Right? The ability to know this, ultimately, again, is incredibly important. V'zeu lahagid baboker chasdecha, haynu kishemisnahig bechasodim megulim ve'emunascha baleilos, haynu chasodim mechusim. Tzarech lazeh emunah. It's an incredibly beautiful insight, I think. So the Mari Cheskel says, lahagid baboker chasdecha, that's easy. That's easy, because what does that refer to according to the Mari Cheskel? What does boker refer to? I'm sorry? Hashem's chesed is obvious. Thank you. Good. Right? Good. Excellent. I'm not sure why I'm having difficulty today. Good. I'm good. My age is catching up with me. But in any event, good. Hashem's chesed is obvious. Lahagid baboker chasdecha. Lahagid baboker chasdecha. That's obvious. That's easy. Everyone, right? Again, think about a simcha that you experienced. Think about an accomplishment that you experienced. Think about a bracha that you were zocha to have. It's easy to sing the Ribono Shel Olam's praises when life is good. That's easy. And by the way, it doesn't even require emunah, because it's so obvious. It's like reflexive. Ve'emunascha baleilos. But I have to harbor in myself the emunah, the belief that you are good, Ribono Shel Olam, baleilos, at night. Night represents adversity. Night represents difficulty. I have to work on myself. Now, interestingly enough, if I were to ask you, where does emunah reside? Does Emunah reside in your mind or in your heart? What would you say?
I think I'm just learned this summer that like everyone like is naturally has Emunah, but like the applications that
Good. So actually, we're going to talk about this, about the innateness of Emunah. In terms of where Emunah lives, I think different people are wired in different ways. I think some people are just naturally more cerebral people, and some people are just naturally more emotional people. I think Emunah ultimately, again, has to reside in both places. But ultimately, if we go with Reb Tzadik's idea that the distinction between intellectual knowledge versus emotional knowledge is that intellectual knowledge you could know, but yet actively choose to ignore, but emotional knowledge, once you know it, you will not ignore it. Then the goal really becomes, in Reb Tzadik's view, which is not just Reb Tzadik, I think that's the view of Chassidus, is to go ahead and have your emunah reside in your heart. I'm striving for emotional emunah. Now again, can you have emotional emunah without intellectual emunah? Can you?
Yeah.
Absolutely. What do we call that? Emunah pshuta. Right? That's emunah pshuta. Right? Emunah pshuta is emotional emunah without. So, in other words, if you go over to someone to emunah pshuta and you ask them, explain to me your emunah in the Ribono Shel Olam, what will they tell you? I believe. Yeah, that's what it is. I can't explain it to you. I could just tell you it's what I believe. By the way, and you could go over to somebody with intellectual emunah, and by the way, you ask them, explain to me your emunah, what are they going to do? They're going to give you a whole philosophical discourse. Well, who would you like to hear? Emunah according to the Ramchal, Emunah according to Rabbeinu Bachya, Emunah according to the Rambam. Who would you like to hear? Now, 5 minutes into it, you're generally sleeping already. But Lamaisa, right? It's two different kinds of emunah. I just want to point out something very interesting, because I think you see even like an evolution in Amni. So I'll give you an example. If you were to, so those of you who are privileged to still have grandparents who are alive, I would urge you to engage in the following exercise. Ask your grandmother why she lights Shabbos candles. I will give you a money back guarantee about what her answer is going to be. Right? What is her answer going to be? Because my mother did it. Okay, and if I were to ask any of you why, whether if you have them light Shabbos candles already, or Emir Hashem one day B'Shat Tova you will light Shabbos candles, you're going to answer me why? Right, because again, well, what depends, right? 2 candles, Zocher, Shomer, Shalom Bayis, there's a Rambam, there's a this, there's a that. I'm sure you're all incredibly well versed in halachas. Which is a greater level, you or your grandmother? Right? I'm sorry?
Our generation needs more of that.
I actually would make the exact opposite argument. I think what our generation needs more is actually a lot more emunah pshuta. I think everything has become so intellectualized that you have people who know the greatest danger, right? The existential challenge of our generation is inspiration, is emunah.
Isn't the reason the Chavetz Chaim said like once we like women are able to be learning is because we need that lot.
No, it was a response to the fact, not that women need is a very dangerous word, right? Because I'm saying need. What do I need $1 million? I need $1 million. Maybe I want $1 million. Remember, that was a societal issue, and the Chavetz Chaim understood that if women are able to grow in every single area, but the one place they meet a dead end is their Yiddishkeit, how is that going to stem? And obviously the Chavetz Chaim was absolutely correct. Need, I'm always scared of the word need, because people very often use need and want interchangeably. But again, let me come back to this for just a moment. So again, the answer is, which one is better? They're both great. They're both great. But I think we would all agree that there's something beautifully simple in your grandmother's answer. There's something beautifully simple about it. It's emunah pshuta. Now again, they're not exclusive. I want to be very clear, right? Emunah of the heart and emunah of the mind. The Shabbos candles because my mother did it, and the Shabbos candles because you know all of the Torah around it. They're both incredible. They're both incredible. I would venture to say which one has greater staying power. What do you think? I think Emunah Pshuta has greater staying power. Because intellect, you could always erode intellect, right? Because remember, again, if you know something intellectually, that's fine. But if somebody presents you with a more intellectually compelling argument, then what? Then that argument wins the day, right? Again, intellect is all about, for lack of a better term, we'll call it, pre-organized, thoughtful constructs. So right now, again, my intellectual construct is this. If somebody presents me with something better or something more compelling, then perhaps I'll switch my intellectual construct. Emunah Pshuta is so simple that it's immutable. It's so simple that it's unchangeable. And by the way, to a certain degree, I think if you look, to me, this is what I find most compelling. And maybe because I was exposed to this in my family from a young age. If you look at those Jews who rebuilt after the Holocaust. Look at the rebuilding, which again is less than a century ago. Right? Look at how Am Yisrael was virtually decimated, and there was a rebuilding. How did that rebuilding take place? What was the Emunah that fueled that rebuilding? It wasn't an intellectual Emunah. It couldn't be an intellectual Emunah. Why? Because there was absolutely no way to comprehend what happened. There was no way to comprehend how 6 million Jews, how 6 million precious neshamas met such a barbaric end. There is no intellectual argument. And in fact, personally, I feel anyone who tries to advance different reasonings for this, I think it personally borders on apikarsus and maybe even tinged with a little bit of amaratsus. But the only way you go ahead and rebuild from something like that is if you have Emunah Pshuta. Is if you believe that, Ribbon Shalom, I don't understand you. I don't understand you. But I believe in you. Why? Because I believe in you. Because my father believed in you. Because my grandfather believed in you. Because my grandmother lit Shabbos candles. Because it's an emotional emunah that is almost divorced from reason. And because it's divorced from reason, it can even withstand the most barbaric and overwhelming circumstances. So again, I want to be clear, not that the intellectual emunah doesn't have a place. Again, we are living in times where, Torah is accessible like never before. Like never before. And obviously, that's the chesed of the Ribbon Shalom. So obviously, if the Ribbon Shalom is allowing us to live in a time where, right, if you have a question, halacha, what do? Ask a Rav. Beautiful. Good. What do a lot of other people do? Ignore it. Okay, no, chas v'shalom, right? Okay, Baruch Shem, you're a group of Nashon Tzidkonos. You Google it, right? Isn't it incredible? Isn't it incredible that even for good things, even for ruchnius, right? Even for ruchnius, I'm sorry?
People really do that?
Absolutely, people do it. Absolutely. Now, again, girls, let me focus you on this. The example that I was just giving is just to show you how accessible Torah is. I'm not advocating for Googling your shilas. I'm saying just understand the time that we live in. Right? Understand the time that we live in, that Torah is so incredibly accessible. Girls, don't get thrown off by Google. Okay? I'm giving you an example of the accessibility of Torah. Never before has anything like this. I don't know if any of you ever use like any of the databases that exist. Otzar HaChachma, Barilan. Where else? It is absolutely overwhelming that you can access Kala Torah Kula at your fingertips. You have a background, you don't have a background, it doesn't make a difference. Obviously, if the Ribono Shel Olam is making that Torah so accessible, it means that he wants us to refine the intellect as well. Right? Chashon Baruch Hu wouldn't make it accessible if he didn't want it to be accessible. But Lamaisa, this balance between intellectual emunah, cognitive, or I should say intellectual emunah, emotional emunah is incredible. So bring this back to the Mari Cheskel. So the Mari Cheskel writes as follows. He says, at the end of the day, this is what it means. L'hagid baboker chastecha. That's easy. That's easy. When times are good, to see the chesed of the Ribono Shel Olam, there's no nisayon in that. There's no nisayon in that. Ve'emunascha ba'leilos. But do you have emunah that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is good and that he loves you, even when you are going through the leilos of life? Do you have that Emunah. And again, the Mari Cheskel doesn't say what kind of Emunah is he referring to. Intellectual Emunah, emotional Emunah. Maybe different people operate in different ways. Reb Tzadok would certainly posit that the Mari Cheskel, David HaMelech, is referring to emotional Emunah. Because intellectual Emunah often will not stand up in the leilos. But emotional emunah absolutely will. But again, however, I say people are wired in different ways. So whatever works for you, works for you. But says the Mari Cheskel, that's the meaning of what David HaMelech is trying to convey. L'hagid bavoker chasdecha, easy. The true litmus test of the ruchnius of a Jew, of where I'm holding in my ruchnius, the emunas chabalelos. Do I believe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves me, cares about me, watches over me, and is choreographing my circumstances, even when I am in the leilos of life. Be it national leilos or personal leilos. All right, so we'll stop over here. In Meretz Hashem, we will continue with Laila through next week as well in Meretz Hashem, and continue in our journey in Emunah.